Sometimes the frustration you feel is a sign. The irritation, the annoyance, that persistent something that just feels off and it won't quite leave you alone. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because I think a lot of us have a tendency to push it down, or we assign it to something or someone outside of us, or we just try to power through as if it's a thing to be managed, when really it's something we need to listen to. What our bodies are showing us in those moments is where we have relinquished our power, where we feel like we are no longer in resonance with the person we have become. And so the mirror, the reflection, keeps getting louder and it keeps getting louder because our body is not subtle about it. Our hearts are not subtle about it. There comes a point where what is misaligned in us starts to insist on being seen. So let me give you an example. And I think this is one that a lot of people can relate to. It's certainly one that I can relate to. Let's say you're working somewhere and you just know somewhere deep in you that this is not what you want to be doing, but you don't trust it yet. You haven't really figured out the plan. The bills need to be paid. You want to make sure that you don't go without having. You don't know what's going to be on the other side. So you stay with something that feels comfortable instead of jumping, instead of taking that leap at something that may actually fling your heart wide open and become your wildest dreams. And the thing that I've noticed is when we stay, the reflection starts to get louder. You start to feel more irritated, more frustrated, more constricted. You start to feel that pull that every Sunday night, every Monday morning, every time you walk through the door of your job, every time you sit in that meeting, every time you open up your laptop, and it just builds and it builds until it gets to a point where it just bursts and you end up doing something out of rash behavior, out of extreme frustration and irritation. You finally move, which is great, but it's not from your center. You move because you couldn't hold it anymore. And then on the other side of it, you say the words, you say, I knew I should have done this months ago. Sit with that phrase. I knew. There was something inside of you that knew. There was something inside of you that was speaking, that was pointing, that was nudging long before the explosion you had. There is always something inside of us pointing to a different way of living, a different way of being, a different posture toward our own lives. Our body knows, our hearts know. And the frustration is one of the ways it speaks to you when the perhaps gentler voices have already been ignored. Or maybe it shows up for you differently. Let me give you another example. Maybe you're in a career and you're watching everyone passing you up. You have the credentials, you've done the degrees, you've gotten the certifications, the whole nine yards, this, that, and the third. You've put in the years. On paper, you've done everything you were told you needed to do. But you have an avoidance of speaking up. You're afraid to take the leap. You're afraid to say no. You're afraid to take a chance on yourself. You're afraid to actually speak up for what you believe in because it feels more familiar to sit on the back burner. It feels more comfortable to stay quiet, to stay agreeable, to stay the version of yourself that everyone has gotten used to, including yourself. And the frustration builds because part of you knows, part of you has known for a long time. There's a version of you that has been waiting patiently and then less patiently to be expressed. So I really want to give you the invite to look at this honestly. The frustration and the annoyance is pointing you back to something. Sometimes it's pointing you back to an action you must take, a choice, a yes, a no, or conversation, goodbye, a beginning, and sometimes the frustration and that annoyance is pointing you back to an unresolved emotion or an unresolved trauma or a grief that you perhaps haven't fully given the space to feel. All of those are valid, and one is not more inherently spiritual than the other. But the invite today is specifically to look at those places where you have relinquished your power, where you have just gone with the familiar, because the familiar is the only way you know how to live and be, where you have made yourself smaller or quieter or more agreeable because the alternative felt too uncertain. Where are those areas in your life? Really look. Where are they? The thing I keep coming back to is it always points back to our hearts, where the heart feels restricted, where the heart feels open, where you feel the most authentic, and where you feel the most distant from the person you truly are. Your heart is always guiding you, even when you feel very annoyed, even in the places where you feel the most frustrated or the most constricted, the most stuck, the most resentful. Even so, it's guiding you back to make a decision, to make a choice about the person you want to be, the life you want to live, about what you are willing to keep tolerating, about what you are no longer available for. I do want to acknowledge, yes, it feels scary. Of course, it feels scary because the direction the heart is pointing you toward is almost never the direction that keeps everything the same. The heart does not point us back to what feels familiar, it points us toward what's new, forward. It points us into what we have not yet lived, into the version of us that has not yet been met. And our mind doesn't like that. Our mind likes safe. Our mind would rather stay frustrated in the familiar than free and open in the unknown. But our heart keeps speaking. And eventually, what you've been pushing down starts to push back. Our heart are pointing us toward what feels expansive, what feels free, what feels joyous, what feels fun and full of wonder. That is the language of the heart. Expansion, freedom. And every single time we go against that, it's like every time we choose against that expansion, we energetically layer over the essence of who we are. Every time we have said no out of guilt or people pleasing, when our heart was saying yes, that's a layer. Every time we have held on to resentment instead of releasing it, every time we have carried shame that didn't belong to us, every time we have stayed in places we had already outgrown, in places that were no longer in coherence with the person we had evolved into, those are layers. Every time we held in an emotion because we were afraid of what people would think of us, or because we were afraid to actually feel the emotion ourselves, afraid of what it would mean about us if we did. Maybe we weren't strong enough. Maybe we were weak. Maybe we were too vulnerable. So we held up the facade, and the facade became another layer. Maybe the anger you felt was pointing you back to where you felt the most hurt. The resentment was pointing you back to where you had abandoned yourself. The frustration was pointing you back to where your heart had been quietly asking for something a long time ago. It's always pointing us back to our inner experience, always pointing us back home. But every time we go against that, we add on layers of distortion, layers that cover up our own magnificence, layers between who we are and who we are presenting to the world. The real work is not about becoming someone new. It's really about peeling those layers back and coming home to the version that is already there. So the question then becomes, what life do you want to create? It's not a question everyone is willing to ask because that's their journey and we have to respect the timing of each person's becoming. But if you are willing to ask, if you are willing to actually sit in the question, what life do you want to live? You reach a choice point on the person you want to be, on what you are willing to listen to inside of yourself, and what you are no longer willing to ignore. Who do you want to be? What is the life you want to live? How do you want to live it?